Welcome to the Arena Decklist Podcast. I'm Gary Thompson, joined by Brian Gottlieb and also some death clouds, I guess, clouds of smoke.
Less death clouds today. We are in the process of clearing out our death clouds. There's a bit of a thunderstorm going on outside, so maybe a different type of death cloud actually is a better way of putting it.
No, that's good. Don't speak ill of the thunderstorm in your time of need, you know?
Well, there's like... I don't know that this is the case. I don't know enough about meteorology, but I do know there's like phenomenon where enough particulates in the air can in and of themselves cause severe thunderstorms. So like, I don't know if this thunderstorm is a consequence of the smoke or like just a natural thunderstorm that's happening alongside the smoke. That's really not my place to judge, I guess.
Yeah, I was hoping it was just a natural occurrence,
and it might be
fortuitous timing.
Yeah, it might be. That's very possible.
But if it is just now like raining death cloud form on you, then that's less good for sure.
Just the ash has combined into a fiery storm in the sky to just incinerate us all while we choke to death on the smog of our hubris. So,
well, I guess that line is a pretty good segue into Diablo 4. If you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, playing a little Diablo 4. How are you liking it? Are you enjoying yourself?
Yeah, it is good. I did start playing.
I think the best way to describe it is good. It's just good. Like it's not. I don't think it's fantastic, great, phenomenal. It's just like good, consistent, well made.
Yeah, like the some of the stuff is like frustrating or clunky or whatever, but the gameplay loop is very good.
Yeah, very satisfying.
So yeah, I've been doing that a little bit. We gotta carve out some time in your schedule and get a little sesh on the books, you know?
Yeah, that would be nice. I think I'm mostly like waiting for the end game. That's probably the best. At least my past Diablo experience tells me that's when we should like pair up and run dungeons and get gear and stuff. I don't know how far along you are. I tend to have to play in very short spurts presently.
How far along are you?
I just got my horse today, which I'm pretty excited about. And I think I'm like level 32 or something like that.
Okay. I got my horse at level 38.
Okay.
Because I got sidetracked.
Yeah, you started doing side quests and whatnot.
Yeah, dude, there's so many like little like blue.
There are. Did you play Diablo 3?
No.
All right. So in Diablo 3, like the metagame was you just tear ass through the story and like don't even pay any attention to what's going on. Get to the end game as soon as possible because the leveling there is like way more efficient and you just want to get to that state as soon as possible because it kind of gets rid of a lot of the nonsense and just like drops you into a good dungeon with better stuff in it to go find, and that's where you want to be. I don't think that's quite as much the case in Diablo 4. I mean, I don't know. I'm not like trying to play it for optimal efficiency, but just my training in Diablo 3 told me to approach it that way and just move through the story.
Okay.
And I think in terms of like getting the horse as soon as possible is probably a good idea because that is gated behind the story.
Yeah. And I did know that. I looked that up because I saw that we get a horsey at some point.
Yeah. Because you can go check in on the barn like pretty early on. And
yeah. And then it just tells you like progress the story, do this side quest or whatever. And it was like, okay, well, I know this will happen at some point. And then it was taking forever, man. I don't know. So I was like, whatever, I'll just keep doing these side quests. And I got there eventually. So I'm I'm in the 40s. I'm, a little bit after that at some point, but have slowed down a little bit for sure.
Yep.
But, you want to tell me that I got to rush the last bit of story and, then we can battle together. I'm in, dude. I'll do it.
Yeah. Once I do that, then we'll be ready to hit the dungeons, find ourselves some new gear, and then do that till the end of time.
Yeah, roughly a million times.
You just keep doing it. It never stops.
Unless you want to start a new class, which I kind of do, actually.
Yeah, I'm not pleased with my class, I think.
What are you?
It's fine. I'm a druid. I was very drawn to being a werebear. Like, it just felt natural.
I mean, it looks good. I generally do not like druid from like, Hearthstone or whatever.
Yep.
It's like, this doesn't really feel like a thing that I want to be doing or whatever. But I don't know. Watch some people play. It looked kind of fun. Going around smashing stuff.
Yeah, the Smash vibe is good. I just usually play like a sorcerer type deal. and I strayed from that, and now I have seen videos of sorcerers, and I'm like, oh, I want to do that stuff. So
Yeah.
we'll get there at some point, I'm sure.
Right on. Was that it? I feel like I was going to talk about something else, but maybe it was just Death Cloud and Diablo.
Maybe I'm playing some Street Fighter as well.
Okay,
Street
how's
Fighter
that going?
6. It's good. I think it's actually like one of the most exciting fighting games made in a very long time. I think fighting games have been sort of stagnant for a little while now. And there's kind of like a lull. Feels like the last like great, well, I don't know. Guilty Gear had its ups and downs. I think to me the last great fighting game released was Tekken 7, which is quite a ways back now. So I think having Street Fighter 6 be legitimately great is pretty exciting.
Awesome.
And I'm a silver Street Fighter. I feel pretty good about that for being an old man. I just watch videos like people post like this. I saw one on Twitter today, and someone's like, "This is the Street Fighter experience if you're over 30 years old," and it's just getting comboed the entire time and dying.
Nice.
And,
yeah.
I tend to win more than I lose, and I'm slowly climbing the ladder. So I feel pretty good about where I'm at.
Excellent. Dude, good job.
Thanks. Still got it.
Yeah. Do you start at bronze?
Lower than that, I think. There's like an iron or something.
Nice. Okay.
Below that. Yeah. I think it goes like rookie, iron, bronze, silver.
Gotcha. All right. And I do feel like there's something else, but it is what it is. It's too bad. I guess we'll talk.
Did you want to talk about the new Light Illusionist and the new Shadow Runeblade, or is that not on the agenda?
The what?
The new Light Illusionist and the new Shadow Runeblade that just got previewed today.
I don't know what those are.
Oh, okay. Then you probably don't want to talk about it.
Are those magic cards?
No, they're flesh and blood cards.
Oh.
Heroes. Exciting heroes. Replacements for heroes that living legended out of the game.
I was like, are those Lord of the Rings cards?
They no could idea. Be. Nobody would ever know.
Do you know there are people that would know?
I went and looked at the Lord of the Rings set, by the way, to see if there was like a show we could do there. Because I talked about forcing you to do a top 10, and I like started putting together my top 10. I got like 2 cards that were maybes, and that was it. And I'm like, all right, let's just not do this. It's not very exciting.
That is great news to me.
Yeah,
I love that.
I don't understand why it's not a standard legal set, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess especially if they're going to do like 3 years of standard, but those decisions were certainly made independent of each other,
ago. Yeah, like to me, the reason you make that decision is because you're trying to preserve like purity of standard or something, and trying to keep it a space where you keep out the universe beyond stuff. But then you think about it, and there's the Dungeons and Dragons set, and also what a letdown the Dungeons and Dragons set now is in retrospect. I mean, I found it disappointing at the time, and I think when I was still writing articles, I actually wrote it was my most disappointing Magic release of the year. But especially seeing like the level of care and creativity and detail that was put into this Lord of the Rings set, man, does that Dungeons and Dragons set feel like a miss. And I just wish like a lot of these cards would be interesting in the standard context. They are not interesting in the modern context whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why they were gated so hard behind that. And I just wish this was the standard legal set as opposed to the Dungeons and Dragons one.
I mean, have I told you about the D&D set?
I don't think so.
Remind me to tell you when we're done recording.
Oh, this is not podcast information.
Not today. Maybe someday,
when we're on our way out the door?
Yeah.
Okay.
Someday. All right. I'm like scrolling through this Lord of the Rings set, and I see a saga that has 6 chapters. That's all the same chapter.
Yep.
I ain't reading that though, so I'm closing that tab, and we can talk about Pioneer.
Yeah, Pioneer RC is going on, and I will tell you, Gerald, in what starts to seem like exciting news, but actually ends up not being exciting or interesting at all. There's a Pioneer tournament near me tomorrow, and I started looking at deck options and looking through my cards, and then I realized just anything I wanted to play, I was missing too much stuff. I don't know where to get cards on short notice, and I gave up. But I almost played a Pioneer RCQ.
Don't you have friends?
No. In fact, I really want to see the new.
Though.
No, nobody likes me. I really wanted to see the new Spider-Man movie, and I'm like pretty excited.
Well, that is just smart. I want to see that too.
Yeah. So I'm like, well, who could I get? And I want to go during the day. I don't like going to crowded theaters, and people work during the day, and I have a weird schedule, so can do that. And I'm like, well, what kind of friends do I have who would go to see Spider-Man with me? And I'm like, oh, none. I'm like, okay, well, my mom's retired. Maybe she'll go see Spider-Man with me. And I'm like, hey, Mom, do you want to go see Spider-Man today? And she's like, nah, I have plans. So my mom shut me down
Getting
to
big
go see
time
Spider-Man.
by your mom.
Yeah. So that tells you the state of my friendships and how readily available I have various Magic cards.
Okay, here's me. I'm going to shoot my shot.
Okay.
There is an SCG in Baltimore this weekend.
Yeah.
If you come,
no.
Brian, if you come, my plan currently is to stay in a hotel room by myself because I have no friends.
Okay.
And so you can, I've crashed with you for free.
Yeah.
A lot of times at Flesh and Blood events. And I think the logic there is like, well, y'all have the room anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
so,
it wouldn't matter. You're always welcome to crash with me. Like if you were coming to something I knew you didn't really want to be at, I wouldn't like charge you a rental fee to come hang out with me.
Well, okay. So the same goes here. I'm gonna be in this room by myself no matter what.
Yeah.
So if you want to come, you're free to stay with me, and we can go see Spider-Man. I will happily skip X days of Magic, whether it's like all 3 of them or whatever.
I will say with a bit more notice, maybe I could have made this work. It's not going to work for this weekend.
Man, where to get cards on short notice? Where to get friends on short notice? If only there was like an Uber for these things,
Yeah, striking out left and right.
Story of our lives. Anyway, Pioneer.
Wait, why are you going to the Magic tournament?
Good question.
Okay.
No,
you don't have to have an answer. I understand. I do these things all the time.
One of my friends is coming up, and I sort of figured that this would be the case where you'd like come up with other people or whatever and have their own place. But he's even staying with like, I think he said his friend's sister, something along those lines.
I see. So you'll know someone there. You just don't have someone to crash with.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So, definitely do not feel comfortable being like, hey, can I stay at this stranger's house or whatever,
Right. Which is something we absolutely would have done back in the day. In fact, one of the first few times we ever hung out was at someone who was probably a stranger to your house, I think, at Maddie Gem's house. Did you know Maddie Gem before you stayed there?
I mean, not well.
Yeah.
For sure. But yeah.
I just remember there was like 14 of us staying there.
Yeah. That stuff like that did happen a lot. Yeah. Too old for that shit now, man. I don't know.
Oh, agree. I need a quiet, comfortable, dark place.
Yeah, I'm not upset about staying by myself.
Oh, I'm sure. I do that. In fact, almost anytime I'm working now, I make it a point that I want to stay by myself or with a very, very select group of people who I know, like I don't have to interact with or amuse in any way whatsoever. I can just like shut down at the end of the day because it's so draining to be around that many people all day.
Yep. All right. 5 regional championships.
5 champions.
I mean, I guess
10-ish invites to Worlds. We're not exactly sure.
Either way, it's too many.
I'm not going to say that. I just think it's the tournament has changed. Like I think continuing to call it Worlds is, I mean, whatever. All this stuff has changed, so it doesn't really matter to me.
Yeah, I mean, fine. Worlds used to be a 400 player tournament, basically.
Correct.
So,
correct.
The fact that it went down to like 32 did change it, and it's not the same as it was, and just need to change our expectations a little bit, which is fine.
Yeah, I think so.
But yeah, 5 regional championships happening on the same weekend. We have a Frank Carson tweet and an accompanying article. So, shout outs to Frank for doing all the hard work and for basically making our podcast for us.
Yeah, as he always does around these things. Just rely on what Frank says and then talk through it. And good stuff to talk through here. Kind of, I don't know. I didn't find these results super surprising with the exception of a couple outliers, mostly on the positive side. But kind of what I expected for a lot of the rest of the format, honestly.
Yeah, not too shocking overall, I guess, but definitely some cool stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
So the deck with the best win rate, I believe this is part of the surprising part of things because, I certainly wouldn't have called this. You wouldn't have called this, but
No.
the highest win rate at 62.5% with basically about 100 matches. So, like a pretty decent sample size.
Decent sample size. Yeah.
Yeah, Azorius Lotus Field. And
Yeah.
I saw this list from the Canadian RC, and I was like, this actually looks pretty good for what the format is now.
Yeah, it really does look fine. I was like waiting to go through it and be like, well, hate this card, garbage. What are we doing here? And then I'm like, no, I think this is actually completely fine. And a lot of like when we talk about control in these like more expansive formats, be it Pioneer or Modern, we talk about just like that power spike and how fair these decks tend to play and how it doesn't line up with the rest of the format. And I would say that about like Pioneer Azorius Control, which I think is completely medium. Like you could register it. I could register it just because I have a comfort level with that style of deck. I don't think I'd be making a heinous decision, but I'm very convinced I'm not making the best decision. But something like this Azorius Lotus Field deck, which relies on strict proctor as well as discontinuity to really up the stage of the game you're playing on, I think it's really exciting. Like it just adds another wrinkle to what you are capable of and lets you play on power scale with the other decks in the format. And I'm kind of a believer here. Like I think some things would have to change pretty dramatically about the format before this gets like invalidated entirely. I expect what will happen is this deck gets picked up in large part after this RC. It has a really, really poor performance for a couple of weeks. Like the next time we get to look at our little cubes, it's going to have like a 45% win rate as everyone rushes to pick it up as the hot new thing. But I think people who stick with this archetype continue to refine it, continue to think about how we're occupying those removal slots, what the card draw is, what small amount of counter magic is actually going to make the cut, what kind of like top ends you want, be it Dream Trawler, Finale of Revelation stuff. Getting all of that right on a week-to-week basis is pretty exciting for this deck. And I think we might have seen a metagame evolution here. And we get a Castle Bantress in there. So the deck is just banging all over the place.
I was going to mention that. So this deck has 26 land and 2 Jwari Disruptions. And then, the core that you mentioned, like Strict Proctor, Discontinuity, not messing around, 8 cards that turn off the downside of Lotus Field, and then also 3 Thespian stages too.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the deck is basically just like card drawing, sweepers, and planeswalkers. That's it.
Pretty simple, but doing that ahead of curve is a big deal. And I just love how Discontinuity bridges this plan so well. And I know this isn't the first time we've seen this, but this does look like the best shell I've seen for it. You get the 2 mana stifle effect, go ahead and get your Lotus Field into play. But once you have a Lotus Field, this is a real card. Like this can do some damage to your opponent's plans, especially the way the format is set up right now. Like this can just be a KO against a lot of folks out there. And I think that's a really, really exciting place for this deck to be.
Yeah, this list looks very, very good to me. And I'm not surprised to see like one copy of it doing well. But the best win rate overall with like a big sample size, like that is kind of surprising. I am sort of surprised that this deck had as many people on board with it as it did. But those people are all pretty smart, apparently.
Yeah, it looks like it. I mean, this probably represents what, like 7. We'll say some of them probably didn't make day 2s, or so maybe we're looking at like 9 or 10 players for this sample size that were presented here.
Yeah.
And across 5 tournaments, 9 or 10 players putting up these kind of results. And the results, honestly, like a lot of times you see a deck like this and you're like, oh, maybe it's preying on the softer part of the field. But you look across like the core matchups that this deck was playing, did really, really well. Like very impressive against Mono Green Devotion, very solid against Rakdos Midrange, which everyone might be solid against Rakdos Midrange. But in general, I just like the matchup spread a lot. And it makes sense when you think about the cards that are in this deck.
Also 5-0 against Boros Convoke, which was kind of like the hotness coming into the weekend, I guess. But
yeah, I was always skeptical about that. And we'll get there eventually.
Yeah. So I like this, and I agree with you. This is just now a player in the metagame, I think.
That's cool. It's cool to see things like that change on a weekend. It makes it feel like this stuff is still having very large impact. And I think even the next two decks on here, not that they're new things, but I think their position on this chart are a little surprising, and they should inform what's going on in the metagame going forward.
Yep. So second best win rate goes to Rakdos Sacrifice, roughly 500, like just shy of 500 matches, 59.1% win rate. Uh, like Azorius Lotus Field went 12-8 against Rakdos midrange. This deck went 60-28.
Yeah, 68% win rate, and
Yeah.
that's just a trouncing. And look, every time we do these deck reviews, you and I kind of sing the praises of Rakdos Sacrifice while glossing over Rakdos midrange. And I do think there's a reason for that. Like the end game states this deck gets to feel more powerful to me. The level of consistency when you're loaded with one drops and all these kind of redundant engines feels very powerful to me. And then you look at some of the matchups this deck got, like being 68% in the quote unquote mirror. And then there's also a 91% matchup against mono white humans, which was a fairly well represented deck. Almost 1,000 matches of mono white humans played over the course of these 5 events. So that's a good number of players for sure. If you can take a 91% matchup against a reasonably highly played deck, it's a real good spot to be in.
Yeah, and decent against Convoke, 60% there. But a coin flip against Devotion, and then slightly better than favorable win rates against Is It Creativity and Azorius Control, both of which I'm like kind of surprised by, actually. And then 45% against Greasefang, which is not surprising.
I think the sacrifice decks have gotten much better tools for playing a bit of a long game against things like Azorius Control and
like yes, but it's all small ball stuff, you know? Like you can never run out of things to do, but eventually they are going to start dropping like Teferis on you that you can't really deal with.
For sure. I just think like I don't know, your deck is just naturally bigger now. Like things like Fable the Mirror Breaker make it naturally bigger. You have real threats, and then you go to sideboarding, you get things like your Ob Nixilis where you get a little bit stickier.
Yeah. After sideboard, things seem pretty decent.
They tighten up. Yeah. I mean, you're playing the 4 Thoughtseize 2 Duress package, so you are disruptive. You're able to take those key pieces of interactions on key turns. And with the shift to Unlucky Witness, you're just seeing more of your deck, right? And I think like, I don't know. Again, this is another card. Every time we see it in the list, I kind of get excited. And I just think this card is phenomenal. Like it's exactly
card.
what this archetype was missing.
Absolutely busted card.
Yeah.
Third place deck, Azorius Spirits, 57%, 600-ish matches. 48% against Rakdos, 61% against Devotion. That number is lower than I'm happy with. Pretty close to even against Creativity and Blue Eye Control. 88% against Greasefang. There it is. That's a good win rate. 45% against humans, 44% against Convoke.
Yeah, so I think you just don't want to play the other creature decks, right? Like that's what's going on here. Is you're punished pretty hard against creature decks. You're good against combo decks, and nice read on the format to the folks who brought Azorius Spirits, especially in the face of things like, oh, Boros Convoke is going to be everywhere, because not a good matchup, I think. I mean, you can find tricks and you can sideboard around it, and maybe you make it okay, but it's certainly not what you want to play against. And you had to kind of make the read that all this Hogak talk was nonsense, and I think these players mostly did that, so good for them.
Literally Hogak.
Literally.
47% win rate.
It's just something needs to be banned. It's just, it needs to happen, Gerald. It's irresponsible not to.
Fourth place, another surprising one. Selesnya Angels, 54% win rate, a little over 100 matches. Bad against Devotion and Blue Eye Control, slight dog to Creativity, even-ish against Greasefang, but only 2 matches, and then good against humans, Rakdos Mid, and Convoke.
Yeah, I think this is probably the other side of the Azorius Spirits coin. Like, you just want to beat up on other creature decks. here's your way to do it. Not a lot of disruption, not a lot of staying power, so you struggle against your control matchups, but any kind of mid-range-ish creature-based stuff, you just steal their lunch money.
Also, your clock is just not that good, too.
Yep, that's true. So it's hard to just race combo.
Yeah. And then mono blue spirits, 54% with about 100 matches. How does this compare to Azorius? A little bit worse against Rakdos.
Yeah, I feel like the sample size is probably too hard to make a
It
comparison.
is.
I bet they're pretty close in terms of matchup percentages. I bet Azorius just picks up like a point or two across most matchups.
Yeah. So other than like the Rakdos being like 10% worse, the rest of the numbers are all pretty similar, honestly.
Yeah. And I think that Rakdos number could even out with a larger sample size where they look pretty similar. I think it's one of those things where there is nothing wrong with mono blue spirits. I just think it's a little bit invalidated by Azorius spirits.
Yeah, that is probably true, but if I was ever going to play spirits, it would be because I thought that mono blue was good.
Okay, I understand where that's coming from.
Like, I would much rather do like Curious Obsession stuff than, I don't know, Spell Queller stuff. You know, that's
I mean, some of these Azorius decks are doing both. We should note, particularly, I think the winner of the Canadian tournament was playing Curious Obsession and Spell Queller. So
yeah,
I think you can just do both.
I don't like that.
Okay.
I don't want clunky cards in my Curious Obsession deck, you know?
Yeah, I understand. You just want to curve out. Yeah, it looks like as far as white cards go, we are only looking at Spell Queller and a Skyclave Apparition in the main deck.
Okay, that's not bad.
And then we go Portable Hole, Wedding Announcement, Invasion of Gobakon, and Catilda. Yeah. Actually, the entire sideboard is white cards,
which makes sense. So, because now, the mono blue cards are not that good. So.
Now you think about it, and you're like, oh, okay. Now I understand what we're doing here. You get to shore up a bunch of matchups in your game 2 and 3. You're still getting similar matchup spreads in game 1. I think this is pretty smart, actually.
Yeah. All right. 6th place, formerly literally Hogak, is Mono Green Devotion. 53.8%. Shit ton of matches played, as expected. 63% against Rakdos, 59% against Creativity, 53% against Azorius Control, 52 against Greasefang, 37 against Humans, and 55 against Convoke.
Yeah, I just think this deck has continued to be really good. Like, nothing has really changed. The Humans matchup being bad is quite interesting to me. It does point a way forward where like Mono Green Devotion is the best thing to be doing. And Humans is a solid deck, like a pretty impressive performance overall when you take away that Rakdos Sacrifice thing. And I think when Rakdos Sacrifice becomes more popular, that means there's less Humans, which should both happen, which means there's more space for Mono Green Devotion at the top of the metagame. I think this deck is going absolutely nowhere and is still like the biggest threat to win your RCQ if you were playing one this weekend.
I feel like we used to go through these cycles where folks would hyper focus on Devotion or Rakdos or Lotus Field, like trying to make sure that they beat those archetypes. And this weekend seemed like folks were just kind of all over the place, and all the decks, I don't know, just sort of got a chance to do their thing. You know, like we've definitely seen worse win rates for Devotion than 54%.
Oh,
right? Like
for sure.
If people want to beat the deck, they can absolutely beat the deck.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people were giving a lot of sideboard slots to literally Hogak. So when a deck like that shows up, you have to account for it in many ways, and that makes room for the most consistent, most brutal, ruthless deck you can really play. And I still think that title is claimed by Mono Green Devotion.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. The deck under that is Mono White Humans. Talked a decent amount about decks that were just like beating up on it kind of mercilessly, but still held a 52.5% win rate.
Yeah.
Slight dog to Rakdos, 45%. That's not bad. 63 against Devo, 61 against Creativity, 57 against Blue Eye Control, 41% against Greasefang, and 51% against Convoke.
Yeah, I think this deck it was fine for this weekend. I think it's less fine going forward. I just think like there's a lot of truth to Rakdos Sacrifice's performance here. I think some, although not all, because people are just kind of stubborn about these mid-range decks. I think some people will start to abandon Rakdos mid-range for Rakdos Sacrifice. I expect that spread of Rakdos decks is going to be closer to like 60-40 next go around, as opposed to here where it was probably like 90-10. And if you get closer to 60-40, I do not want to be the person playing mono white humans. That matchup just seems atrocious if you have to face Rakdos Sacrifice. I'll also point out too that like maybe this deck caught a little bit of splash hate because of a more creature centric metagame.
Yeah.
And to focus on Boros Convoke. And if that's true, and this deck was catching splash hate and still putting up 52.5% win rate, well, then this deck is just good. Like that's a very, very strong spot to be. So if that is the case, and Rakdos Sacrifice doesn't come up and take a huge percentage of the metagame, I think this is still a fine choice. For at least a couple weeks, though, I'd be hesitant here, and I really want to be on the Rakdos Sacrifice side of things.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the easiest way to beat Sacrifice is to just do like go big stuff, like the Blue White Lotus Field deck.
Yep. Yeah, kind of ignore
them. Next deck is normal Azorius Control, 51.1% win rate. Generally don't like this. We kind of, talked about the ability to power spike slightly early, and especially when there are things like Boros Convoke in the format, you sort of need the ability to do that. And like sometimes just like a turn 4 sweeper is that against them. Just gives you like a lot of breathing room back. And granted, there were some innovations. Like there's a blue white list from Abe Corrigan that is Urian, so I don't like it all that much because like the added inconsistencies or whatever. But 4 temporary lockdown for Boros and also 2 copies of Rewind. And I actually do like the Rewinds. I think that is a good change.
That's interesting.
Because it is like another power spiky thing, right? It's like you get to do your counter spell and either like Deluge or Wandering Emperor or whatever on the same turn.
No, that is a big swing for sure.
So I don't know. If you're interested in normal blue white control, I think the Abe's list is a good place to start. And I saw a few other people playing like Rewind in this deck too. So I don't think
it's a very cool pickup. I still think maybe do your due diligence on Azorius Lotus Field if this is really the style you want to play. Although I know
definitely agree.
Azorius control players will not listen to that advice. So
I'll
just save it.
No. But that's okay.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of 50% decks here. Rule Vehicles, Lotus Field.
2 of the 5 RCQs captured in here, by the way. So I don't take a lot away from just what wins the event. I think that doesn't teach you all that much, but worth noting.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So Groove Vehicles, Lotus Field, Enigmatic Fires, Demir Rogues, and then Abzan Greasefang at 49%, like just shy of 50. So
yep.
Some coin flippy decks. The Fires deck I kind of want to talk about because Raph's deck looks very good.
Yeah, I think this deck has a real purpose, and it's shown in its 65% win rate against Rakdos midrange, and Rakdos midrange was the most played deck by like a decent margin. So this was not a bad choice, I think, for this weekend. I just think you have to be very aware of the type of field you are going into. If I was playing a local RCQ, I would not play this deck. I don't think the field congeals as much towards Rakdos midrange in the smaller fields. This is more about people who think they have an edge just playing long, grindy, consistent games, and that puts them on Rakdos midrange. Naturally, I don't think that's going to be as true at your RCQ scene.
Yeah. I think that that's fair, but like the deck also does kind of unfair things. Like you do have that power spike capability, and you're doing it with a strategy that is sort of hard to interact with. The
It can be.
downside is
Can
that
be.
you're just like a little bit too slow, right?
Yeah, a lot of it depends on how sideboards are being built. I think that's what you really have to check in with. And I think to the same point, like there is predictability in this field, and I expect sideboards were probably leaning away from things like enigmatic fires. I think they were trying to account for things like Boros Convoke and for things like Rakdos Midrange more than they were just random weird stuff. And again, I think that changes at your RCQ level, especially among successful RCQ players. They're going to be built to be a little wider because they can leverage skill edges much more effectively.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all that. But I said this about this deck a while ago. It's just like something nice to have kind of in your back pocket,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Sure.
And I still feel that way. Still think it's pretty good. Curious how it does against sacrifice. I would imagine it's quite good.
Should be. It should be fine.
So assuming things like that, assuming things shift in that direction, could also be another viable option, but also probably not very good into a field full of like Lotus Field farewell decks. So depending on how things shake out, it might end up being worse in the coming weeks than just something like the Lotus Field deck. I don't know.
Yeah, it'll be worth keeping an eye on for sure.
Anything else in this like scrum of coin flip decks that you like?
No, I couldn't talk myself into any of these short of Lotus Field, which I think is fine. And like, again, the worst matchup presented here, mono white humans. So mono white humans finding itself preying on Lotus Field, mono green devotion extremely well, kind of suffering everywhere else. If you think mono white humans is going to trend down, you can play some Lotus Field, get some decent matchups. I think that's totally fine.
Yeah,
I still
do
think
like
Lotus
that.
Field is fine.
I like that plan.
I will say though, one other deck that gives me pause in that plan, Spirits is not a good matchup. You do not want to play against that deck.
No, and that's definitely true. I'm kind of curious how the Azorius Lotus Field versus the combo one is, because they are light on interaction.
I was thinking about that. I think discontinuity could be a real problem if you commit too many resources. I think it's a matchup you're going to have to get yourself very familiar with.
But that's it. And it's understand. Like they need one of those cards to be an enabler early.
Yes.
So if discontinuity is the only one that they draw, then they're like down a copy, right? But if
they have to use it in that spot.
If they have Proctor into Lotus Field and then they just have that up the entire game, and they're just chaining like deluges and stuff, like you don't have a whole lot you can do in game one at least.
Right.
And then game two, you're both trying to like thought distortion each other or whatever. Like have fun.
Yeah, things get very silly at that point.
Grease Fang. Just mono coin flips, it looks like.
Yeah, beating up on Boros Convoke, but as we're about to see, don't worry too much about that, I think.
All right. Well, we have Rakdos midrange, 48%. Classic.
Yeah.
2,500 matches. So I think that number is pretty solid.
I agree. And that feels about where this belongs. I think like when this is not the focal point of the format, it's like a very solid 51, 52% deck. I think it is unquestionably the focal point right now, especially at events like this. And the thing that's really brutal about this deck for me is that mono green matchup, 37%. And, Rakdos players, I think, have been on the copium for a while about that matchup. I do not want to play that on the Rakdos side ever. It's not pleasant, and it's not going to get any better.
Rakdos players and copium together? What do you mean?
Yeah, and then there's the Rakdos mirror that we also have to talk about, the Rakdos sacrifice matchup. Like if that is taking percentages, this deck gets a lot worse. Like you just don't have all that much to beat up on. Very good Is It Creativity record, and we'll get to Is It Creativity as well in a while. It's going to be a bit until we get to talk about that, because we need to get way down the chart to talk about Is It Creativity.
Well, so Rakdos was supposed to be the thing that was like beating up on the creature decks, right?
Yeah.
and it's still only 55% against humans. It
Yep.
is pretty bad into devotion, which kind of is and isn't a creature deck.
Yeah,
But
I would not classify it as a creature deck for purposes of like this discussion, but
yes, but at the same time, it's like that's kind of what you need to load your deck up on is like fatal pushes and extinction events,
mm-hmm.
in order to beat them. So
To
the
have a
way the
shot.
Rakdos
Yeah.
approaches it is like a creature deck.
Yeah, that's fair.
But then Rakdos is also bad into Boros Convoke. Not horrible. It's 44%, but like that is
Well, when
supposed to be
that's
the
the
thing that you're good
but that's
at.
the only good matchup Boros Convoke has. They don't beat anything else. So when that's the case, then it doesn't really look very good for you as the Rakdos player, where you just get dumpstered by this deck that can't beat anything. Like you are not a good anti-creature deck at this point. You're just not. You're not good against anything except kind of like creature-based combo, but
Yeah,
only very specific versions of it.
right. That's basically what I was getting at, where it's like, well, if you can't beat Boros Convoke, and granted, maybe people just stop playing the deck. So maybe you just don't even have to worry about it. But it's like, maybe it's time to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
Like we were at a point where maybe Thoughtseize Fable pile of random cards was good in the format, and the format looks dramatically different now than it did back then.
Yep.
Right. So maybe try something else.
I think people did, and that's why we saw the Rakdos sacrifice decks. I think that was going back to the drawing board. So,
And yeah, no, that's good. That's good and fair, and I appreciate that because this is more of a metagame shift than we have seen maybe in any of the previous weeks of Pioneer results. So
I think so. Yeah.
this is all great. I do appreciate what is going on here.
Yep. I'm with you.
Another 48%er Rona combo. Honestly, that's higher than I thought, but Rona also it's Rakdos is the 50-50 deck. Rona is like the 70-30 deck. Like they only have 70-30 matchups.
Yeah, very polarized matchups, and I still have the sense this deck is not figured out. I think it probably was not ready for this tournament. That's also reflected in the sample size here. This was one of the least represented decks on this chart, and probably appropriately so. But I'm not done with this combo yet. I still think there's something there. I still think there's stuff to figure out, but I do not think it was ready for this tournament.
Now, here's my pitch for Rona combo is that it has an unbelievably powerful potential turn 3 kill. And a lot of its combo pieces are blue cards that help you filter through things.
Yeah.
You just need to figure out the rest.
Yes.
And it turns out that part is tough, but like you have the basis for a thing that seems, like inverter-esque, right?
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't necessarily think that, people just haven't like figured out the right build or whatever. I think the pieces just don't really exist in the format, but
maybe
given enough time, we're going to get there.
Yeah, that's a fair way of looking at it.
But yeah, the Ascendancy one looked solid. It looked like a good version of that. At least as far as the things that you can do currently, but still not a thing that I'd be super happy registering.
Yeah, makes sense.
Slightly below that, we have Neoform Atraxa at 47.9. I feel similarly about this deck, where it's like pretty close, does some powerful stuff, again, has a lot of 70-30 matchups, but is just like a little bit off.
Yeah, I think one of the things, like one of the knocks against Pioneer is that it is presented as a 70-30 format. And that's true when you opt into that, and you actually don't have to opt into that anymore. Like there are options that allow you to play reasonable games, reasonable matchup spreads against most people, and they don't have to be actively like bad against some stuff the way Rakdos mid-range is. There's just good, solid, consistent decks out there that you can choose to play. Again, the first one that comes to mind is Mono Green Devotion. You don't have to do this kind of toss-up thing. You can just have game against everyone, win games by beating down sometimes. That's completely allowed, completely fair. And I really want to put Rakdos Sacrifice in that same category as well, where I think you are going to play some tough games, but especially after sideboarding, you have tools to play against everyone, and I don't think you need to opt into these 70-30s anymore.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Finally, like 20th deck down the list, we have Boros Convoke with 600 matches, 47.7% win rate. Honestly, that's not a terrible win rate for a deck that is still pretty highly untuned and like pretty new, but 56% against Rakdos, 45% against Devotion, 54 against Creativity, 33 against Blue Eye Control, 32 against Greasefang, 49 against Humans.
Linear deck that just puts bodies out there will always look impressive when you're goldfishing.
Yes.
And then it has to stand up against the format. And it'll also look impressive the first few times you play it against somebody who has no idea what's going on. The problem is when people know what's going on, when it's going to be played in 600 matches and people account for it, it's going to be very hard for this deck to succeed in this format. I think it's an option. I think it's fine. I think it's going to settle into being a tier 2.5 deck when all is said and done, at least with the current pieces right now. Needs to pick up some elements of just like the staying power is good. I think the disruptive elements just aren't there, and you can do very similar clocks with either extreme staying power or a slight bit of disruption. Like thinking about something like Mono White Humans, which does actually get that disruptive edge, and the clock isn't that far off. Like it's close to what Boros Convoke does.
Yeah,
it's just more enticing to me.
Yeah, I would say either slightly faster, like get a new print, or something that is a little bit more disruptive that also somehow fills the theme, which seems like a taller ask.
Yeah, some kind of like disruptive one drop is what you're looking for, really, because then you're just putting something on the field for your Convoke stuff and you're able to mess up what your opponent is doing. But there's a reason we don't see a lot of disruptive one drops, so I would not hold my breath for that.
Yeah, me either. So it is looking like you need something to be a little bit faster, which is, I mean, at this point, I don't even know. Like, I would look towards maybe something that just like makes the deck a little bit more efficient so that you don't have to play Dragon's Fodder type of stuff or whatever.
Yep.
Like maybe that sort of thing is good enough, but I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet if it's out there.
I guess McVitie's list didn't even, like, Resolute Reinforcements is kind of a Dragon Fodder, but is a good version of that at least.
Mm-hmm.
I guess maybe a better artifact producer too for your demolitions. Maybe that's good enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, whatever. Unlikely. Omnath, Bring to Light, 47%. No surprises there.
Yep.
Like this deck is close, but it's just missing so many beautiful things that Modern has available to it that I do not think will be available in Pioneer, such as, fetch lands or pitch elementals. So yes. I can't imagine what this deck would have to get in order to like increase this matchup spread.
It's a good question. I think it will always be fine against mid-range decks, and therefore people will always play it because it's fun and does cool stuff. So but it'll probably stick around.
It's like an anti-mid-range deck that isn't just annihilating them like Fires or Azorius Lotus Field would.
Yeah. You're not wrong.
It's like
I guess what you are supposed to get for that is like less polarization in your non-mid-range matchups, but I don't think you really get that. Like
no, because there's like a lot of mid 40s and like 33% against Greasefang type of stuff going on here still. So
yeah, that's not good.
At that point, you might as well just play the Fires deck.
I agree.
And we have Is It Creativity at 45.8%.
Yeah, this to me is like, we talked about the shocks at the top of the table. This is kind of shocking result at the bottom of the table. I thought this deck was quite a bit better than this. I still think something in this vein is good. I'm kind of just into the Transmogrify decks now, honestly. Yeah. I think that may just end up being a better version of these creativity decks. Like Jund Transmogrify was actually, if I was going to play what I wanted to play this weekend. And I don't know that I think it's the best deck. I think it might have been the best deck for me in terms of what it does, in terms of how rusty I am at Magic, in terms of just like what I am capable of doing right now. I thought it could be a good choice for me.
You're like, I can point and click at my treasure token, you know?
Correct. I understand how that works. But I think maybe Is It Creativity needs to go back to the drawing board a little bit and think about combining with some other decks, being replaced by some other decks for a little while. It just isn't finding good matchups. And I think the format has prepared, like, this is another 1,000 matchup sample size. This is not,
it's a big sample.
This is not bad data. There's no good matchups out there against the top decks. And that's a real problem. So I do think it's time to go back to the drawing board for this deck.
Yeah, the only positive win rate here is 60% against Greasefang, and then I guess, beating up on the other category.
Yep. Not great.
I think holistically, this is kind of similar to Rakdos, where it's like, yeah, just go back to the drawing board, because you started with this premise of, I will put Xenagos and close and World Spine Worm into play and one shot you, right? And I need that against certain matchups, maybe like Lotus Field and Mono Green, right? And I think that people have found that you don't necessarily need that against Mono Green, and Lotus Field is perpetually like a pretty small portion of the format too.
Yep.
So at that point, it's just like you're doing all this work to do like a World Spine Worm, which is just, not good enough against many, many decks. So is, like you said, like maybe Transmog into Atraxa is just a better option against the majority of the format than a 15/15 is.
I think so. I think right now it is. And that could always change. But I would look to shelf the stock Is It Creativity decks for a while.
I guess that kind of goes hand in hand with Rakdos. Like you were talking about maybe playing Jund Transmog, but there's also like the Grixis version that was floating around too. And I wouldn't say that either of those decks looked particularly great or whatever, but it is something worth exploring if you were previously a 45% like Rakdos or Is It gamer,
Correct.
And then after Is It Creativity, your deck is like doing bad when like these are the decks with the same win rate as you. Mono Black midrange, Is It Phoenix, and Niv to Light.
Oh, don't touch those decks with a 10-foot pole. Not good choices.
Remember when Phoenix was busted and now there's like no one playing it and it's doing badly?
Do you remember when Iteration was a card?
Yeah, that's fair. That is fair.
It makes a big difference.
It does, but
I also think the Is It Phoenix decks started to be built very poorly, for what it's worth. They all got away almost universally from Thing in the Ice.
I
think
know.
That was a huge mistake.
I know.
They all got Ledger Shredder fever for a little while.
Talking about power spikes, man, what is a bigger power spike? Like Thing in the Ice, not only as the tempo tool, right, to reset. Like how good would Thing in the Ice be against like Boros Convoke or
it's great,
whatever, right?
Card's great.
But also just a clock against Lotus Field. Like Thing in the Ice in Modern, for example, was one of your best cards against Tron.
Yep. If Thing in the Ice is not good, don't play this deck.
Right, because Shredder, even though it says discard a card on it somewhere, does not mean that it's good. And several of the cards in your deck are often, several of the cards that say discard a card on them in your deck are the worst cards in your deck. Like the whole like, chart a core strategic planning slot or whatever. It's like, those are the cards that you just don't even want.
Right. You have to play those. You don't want to play them.
Yeah. So the fact that Ledger Shredder is like, oh, it says, discard a card on it. It's like, that doesn't make me want to play it, especially over Thing in the Ice.
No, I think a deck that needs to do some soul searching or maybe just go away. We all loved Phoenix, right? We all had our moments. We lived it in Modern. We lived it in Pioneer. Some things just have to end. In Standard, I played Standard Phoenix at one of the first tournaments it was legal and loved it quite a bit there.
Yeah.
But I think time's running out on Flappy Birds.
When I played Phoenix and liked it, I had like Manamorphose, things like
some real cards,
things like Lava Dart, Maybe. Nah, I'm pretty sure Gataxian Probe was gone.
Faithless Looting.
It definitely had looting. That's a
Yep.
good one. And then it was stuff like Aria Flame out of the sideboard.
Yeah.
Or just like
That was a good sideboard.
Whatever you're trying to do, you can't beat this, So I played Phoenix when it had a bunch of like busted stuff, and that's when I liked it. And I basically have not picked it up at any other point since then. And it's like it's in my wheelhouse. It should be right up my alley, right? But it just
me too. But I also like decks
it's not
that
the
are
same.
Good. Like they got, kind of good. And they don't have to be great. I'll play bad decks, but like they have to have a reason to exist, and this deck does not right now.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, another deck that could maybe benefit from going back to the drawing board. And I don't know, just a while ago we bought in wholesale to Galvanic Iteration, Temporal Trespass type of stuff, and I think that was good in certain matchups, but it is definitely one of the things that is less good in the face of actual interaction or matchups where you don't necessarily need to race them,
For sure.
And I think that we could just be at a point now, if there's like sacrifice and spirits and mono white humans or whatever, where it's like, hey, you just can do away with that, be as lean as possible, like have good interaction. I feel like Is It Charm was a card that people refuse to play because it's just inherently a pretty bad card, and I agree with that, but like it does say discard a card on it, and also counters spells some of the time, and not being able to play
some small percentage of the time.
Yeah, but like it is something compared to nothing, which is what you normally get, right? And there have been Phoenix lists before that are just like, oh, I have to play like some Spell Pierce's main deck or whatever. And like that sucks because it doesn't fit with the rest of your deck in the way that you want it to. Whereas Is It Charm is bad, but it does kind of like bring all of that stuff together.
Yeah, I have probably been higher on Is It Charm throughout its history than I should have been, quite frankly. But modality matters for a certain type of deck, and Phoenix is exactly the type of deck where it matters quite a bit. So I'm down with looking at it again. I agree it's a bad card, but that doesn't really matter. Like that's just not a useful assessment when it comes to Magic.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, Is It Charm always felt the worst to me playing it in like Jeskai Flash kind of stuff, where use that as a faithless looting and like being down a card just significantly hurts you. Like you just like feel it. But in a deck like this, in a format like Pioneer, you have Treasure Cruise in your deck, like you don't care.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter.
Return from that going down a card, and this deck is capable of doing that.
Yeah. So think about stuff like that. And then think about how you'll never play Niv to Light.
Yes, that is certain.
Other category performs better than Niv to Light and Phoenix.
Scary times.
So yeah, big mid-range decks. That's what I like. Lotus Field, maybe Fires, but Fires is probably pretty bad into Lotus Field. So yeah, it just looks like Azuri's Lotus Field is the big winner.
Cool to see. Love seeing a new deck come out of a weekend with high praise and potential to maybe become a mainstay of the format. Like I said, don't be shocked if you see a 47% win rate next time we look at one of these charts. That's kind of what I'm expecting, but I do think we can evolve past that point, and we'll see some good finishes from Azorius Lotus Field in the coming weeks.
Yeah, and we have more RCs coming up and everything. I also remembered what I wanted to talk about in the beginning.
Oh, okay. Let's do that then.
We were supposed to check in on my historic experience.
Oh, that's right. You, as a newly minted MPL player, are now back on the grind for arena points, and you had a big historic tournament this weekend. So please, full tournament report. Let's go.
I played round 1 and lost.
Okay.
And that was it.
That's all. Okay.
It was a best of 3 qualifier. In theory, I suppose I could have joined another one, but I decided that I was against that and that I don't like historic very much.
Yeah, sometimes you just cut your losses, bro. You're like, I tried. This isn't for me. Let's just move on.
I gave it the old college try. I played last week I played Rakdos in Best of One. That was a horrible mistake. There were several other better Best of One decks available to me. And then I thought that for Best of Three, Rakdos was actually good. And I think that it was. And then I just lost a Rakdos mirror where, just opponent peeled a burn spell the turn before I attack for lethal or whatever. And it's like, all right, that took 40 minutes of my life. I'll
never get that back.
I'll never get that back. And I don't want to run the risk of it happening again. So,
yep.
That's it.
Sounds good.
Now I just have 4 Crucius on my accounts, and hopefully I never play with them again.
Maybe it will get banned. Do you get wildcards back if it gets banned?
Probably, because it's like an actual alchemy card.
Yeah, that's your best hope. Oh, but it won't get banned. It'll get changed, right?
Since it's an alchemy card, they're just going to make it cost like 7 mana instead, and I get nothing.
Oh, wow. What a beating. Well, kiss those wild cards goodbye.
So yeah, there's no hope. There's no hope for that. But apparently I did get like rare wild cards, and I still got to play with Fable. So
okay, that's something.
Got that going for me.
Yep.
So when are we gonna play Diablo, man? What do you think?
Well, let's see. As usual, pretty busy. I leave for Auckland in a couple weeks.
Are you gone for like 6 weeks again?
Like 4.5 weeks this go around.
Okay.
So that will also keep me busy. So I'm thinking I might be able to clear a little bit of calendar space sometime in 2024. But don't hold me to that. And we'll check in 2025.
BattleNet won't even be installed on my PC in 2024. At least that's my hope,
That'll be just in time for the DLC.
Okay.
And yeah. No, it's just hard. Like one of the big things that frustrates me about gaming is that if I'm going to keep gaming as a part of my life with the way my schedule works, it's really got to just be like, oh shit, I have 30 minutes of downtime. Let's jam something out. And that's
how do you
conducive.
even do that in Diablo though? Because it's like some of the dungeons are longer than that.
Okay, got it.
Oh, you've upset my watch. Hold on.
No, you did. Your watch can't hear me. All right.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I might get caught mid-dungeon and have to do something else, and I can, find a safe corner to hide in and alt tab out of dungeon for a little while. But for the most part, I actually think Diablo is a game that works pretty well in bite-sized chunks. Kind of. Like, it's not good for that multiplayer experience, but it is good for just like, oh, I'll clear a quick dungeon on this break that I have right now.
Tell you what, whenever you pop on, whenever you decide to play, ping me and ask me if I am also playing.
Okay.
And then I will just like tag along with whatever you're doing.
Okay. Then we'll go and we'll kill demons together. Also, am I the only one kind of rooting for the demons in this game? Like, they don't seem that bad. I know there's like a lot of murder and dismemberment, but like the not demons are also not great.
Yeah. I've come across some unscrupulous humans for sure. Everyone seems kind of shit.
Yeah, the other thing I hope, like, this is a dangerous conversation to have because I do see a way you can interpret my feelings on this that just makes me look like a big asshole. So I'm hoping you have my back on this one. I also just hate all the like parent-child drama because all these parents chose to birth children into a world that is literally being ripped apart by hell on earth. And they're just like, yeah, I'll have a kid. And then they're like sad when something bad happens to their kid. It's like, no, you selfish prick. You knew this was going to happen. There's literally a demon walking around outside while you're copulating with your wife. Like, where did you think this was going to go?
Yeah, I don't know. But like the world, I think, does a good job at mentioning. Like, I haven't played any of the other Diablo games, right? So this is just from this game specifically. But they make a good point of showing that they care for their dead. And like the dead should be respected and everything.
I agree.
So
they do that. So what you're saying
they have not lost that. You would think that in a world where people are just getting murdered on the daily, like right in front of you, like being torn apart or whatever.
Yeah.
That it would desensitize you a little bit. But it like they still find a way to hold on to meaning in that and care about it, which maybe is silly. given the reality, the nature of their situation or whatever.
Yeah. There's also some elements to like, if they have that relationship with death, do they just embrace death as a positive thing? And then like, yes, you birth these children into hell on earth, and like there's a high chance they are probably going to die before their time, but like that's the state of the world. And then they carry on. I guess they do have definitive proof of afterlife, right? So like maybe the consequences are a little bit lower at that point.
If you're a demon, at least.
Yeah.
No, yeah, there's like some stuff going on with like spirituality and whatever, but
right. And there's like that light dude on the other side with the glowing eyes who's like very obviously angel adjacent, and he's real, and like people see him. So
yeah,
I don't know. The whole thing seems very complicated, and it all I'm thinking while I'm like having to watch a parent grieve in a cutscene over their child is I'm like, well, you kind of signed yourself up for that one. And maybe that's a shitty attitude to have, but I wish they made some more conscious decisions about the world they were bringing their kids into.
I did find it kind of fascinating where there was just like this moment where I was just like, how did this NPC live to be like 50 years old?
Yeah, it seems impossible.
Yeah,
for a lot of these people.
But for the people who are creating children into this world and then getting sad when they get cut down at 20 or whatever, and you saying like, oh, what did you expect? It's just like, well, what are they supposed to do otherwise? Like the world is in a shitty place. Like no one is going to save them except for, maybe humans, right? So I feel like it is probably the correct thing to do to produce more humans, but yeah, realistically, everyone just kind of dies.
Although now, the more we think about this, the more I've seen similarities to our own lives. So maybe this is not the best topic.
Yeah, if you turned on the news, I don't know, man.
Yeah. Like, okay. I guess I get it then. Do what you want to do. Enjoy the afterlife. That's what I say.
I feel like the world of Diablo has a problem where there are just not a lot of humans at all.
Definitely more like beasts and monsters than humans, unquestionably.
That's what it seems like, Yeah. So yeah, at that point, like, reproducing makes sense, but in our world, it is like the 1% that control the vast majority of resources. So then birthing more people into the 99% does not, make a whole lot of sense. It is not great because it's just more people fighting for the same slice of the pie, right?
Right. To be exploited by that same 1%.
Correct. So, realistically, folks need to organize and whatnot. And it's not necessarily a population problem. It's just an organization problem.
So you're saying what Diablo needs is unions.
Well, they probably need more people and then
unions.
And then unions or
unionize against the demons, demand only sacrifices on days where we're
fair
working.
And equitable ritual sacrifices.
Yes, that's what we're all striving for in this system.
Anyway, dark game.
Yeah, it is pretty dark. I'll give it that.
In case you're wondering if you should play a game that is, named after a demon and what the vibes are going to be like, you're like, oh yeah, quick vibe check on this game. Yeah, it's pretty dark, honestly.
Yeah, a lot of murder, sacrifice, etc.
Whatever. I don't know. Games have a weird way of like, I go around and like do things and my number goes up and I just don't think about the specifics of it most of the time until it's just like, the storytelling is not bad. And then I'm just like, how is this person 50 in this world? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Right. Like I have like that moment and then I'm like, never mind. I'm just going to turn that off and go back to just like number goes up mode and not pay attention.
It's like watching wrestling basically where like, oh, this doesn't actually make sense whatsoever if you stop and think about it, but you could just enjoy it. It's fun.
Exactly.
Video game.
Video game. There we go.
Good luck.